All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the LKY School. In fact, here at the LKY School, yesterday and the day before, we had a very interesting workshop on international studies in India. And I was extremely impressed to see a room filled with luminaries from India who are working in the field of international studies and talking about how to regenerate interest in this and how to take it forward and so on. Extremely insightful. And one of those luminaries was Amitabh Mattoo, who's sitting right next to me here today, and he's giving a public lecture on building peace in Kashmir. Amitabh Mattoo is currently a professor of international politics at New Delhi's Jawaharlal Nehru University, and he's a member of the National Knowledge Commission, which is a high-level advisory group to the Prime Minister of India. Up until last year, in December, he was the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Jammu. He served on the Governing Council of Bhagwash and is a director of the India-Afghanistan Foundation. Professor Mattoo was, until recently, a member of India's National Security Council's Advisory Board and was also a member of the task force constituted by Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh on global strategic developments. Now, the task force examined various aspects of global trends in strategic affairs and their implications for India. Professor Mattoo had his early education in Burnhall School in Srinagar and the Jawaharlal Nehru University. He earned a DPhil in the international relations from the University of Oxford, and has been a visiting professor at Stanford, Notre Dame, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and he has been chairperson of the Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament at JNU. Recognizing his contribution to education, the President of India honored him on the occasion of the Republic Day in 2008. So please, will you join me in welcoming Professor Mattoo?
Dr. Kenneth Tan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege and an honor to be here at the Lee Kuan Yew School. May I also thank in absentia Dean Kishore Mehbubani for the courtesies that he's extended to us over the last 3 days. I thought what I'll do is speak for about 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and then we can have a discussion, depending on how interested you are in the subject. And one of the reasons I thought, one of the ways to begin this presentation is actually looking at some of the recent news stories on Jammu and Kashmir, or where Kashmir has figured. About a few months ago, I think soon before he took office, President Obama gave an interview to Time Magazine's Joe Klein, where he said that Kashmir was going to be one of the places that his foreign policy administration was going to focus, and that it was likely that he would even appoint President Bill Clinton as a special envoy. That hasn't happened, but Kashmir was in the news for that. Similarly, there's a well-known book, and part of which appeared in an article in Foreign Affairs a few months ago by Ahmed Rashid and Barney Rubin, in which they asked themselves the question, how do you actually stabilize Pakistan? And one of the answers that they gave was that you could actually do so only if somehow you resolved Kashmir. Kashmir is important from a systemic point of view because you see a rivalry between two nuclear-armed states. You see, in some ways, Jammu and Kashmir and that whole region being the center for terrorism, extremism. Bilaterally, India and Pakistan, or Pakistanis more than Indians, see this as evidence of a permanent structural conflict with India. And within India, I think the challenge is how your emergence as a great power can somehow also mean that you resolve your internal problems, including Jammu and Kashmir. This is the kind of peg on which you can really rest any discussion on Kashmir. But my mandate here now is really to look at what are the challenges that you face in Jammu and Kashmir, what are the ways by which you can move forward and have already moved forward. And I shall do this over the next 25 minutes. So the objectives of the presentation is really focused on the complexity of the challenges, ways to move forward, and it's not going to be a history of India, Pakistan, or the Kashmir conflict. I think most of you know it, and it can easily be accessed on the net or through several books that exist on the subject. So it's not going to look back and talk about the United Nations resolutions or whether the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India was complete or not, but really on, conceptually speaking, on the complexity of challenges that exist and ways in which we can address those challenges. What are the challenges? The challenges in J&K are not dissimilar to the challenges that many conflict regions face around the world. It's a center for multiple conflicts and violence, and I'll explain all these. It's got weak institutions. It's been characterized by poor governance. There's social and educational backwardness. And there's continuing extremist tendencies, even while there are polarization along regional, religious, ethnic lines. And its economy is completely parasitical. And who is to blame, as I said, I'm not going to talk about who is to blame, but if you were to capsule the multiple causes in the most reductionist sense, it would be Pakistan's self-negating policies, Kashmir's poor leadership, and of course also Government of India's multiple failures. And when we talk about multiple conflicts, often it's, and even in the most sophisticated of journals or academic writings, Kashmir is really presented as a center of, as I said, the new studies talk about it as only in terms of India-Pakistan terms. But the multiplicity of conflicts that exist, the New Delhi-Islamabad axis is only one part of the complexity of conflicts. There is, in the valley, a conflict, a latent conflict between Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Muslims. I'm a Kashmiri Pandit, but there are very few left in the valley. Most of them have had to leave because of the militancy and violence that Jammu and Kashmir was gripped with for over 20 years. Jammu Kashmir is more than just the valley. It's got Jammu, which is predominantly Hindu. The valley is predominantly Muslim, and Leh, which is predominantly Buddhist, or not predominantly, but it has a majority Buddhist population. So you have tensions between Jammu and Kashmir. You have tensions between Ladakh, the capital of which is Leh, and Jammu. You have a tension between Leh and Kashmir. And of course, there is severe tension between New Delhi and Kashmir, and increasingly between New Delhi and Jammu and New Delhi and Ladakh, as was evidenced by the severe tensions that the state experienced, especially Jammu, and Ladakh has done so periodically over the last 10, 15 years. And finally, of course, there is the India-Pakistan, the New Delhi-Islamabad tension, which has, as you know, resulted in a cycle of violence, terrorism, refugees, civilian casualties, leading to further alienation, regional and religious polarization, and leading to violence and terrorism again. So this vicious cycle has really existed over the last 20, 22 years. When we talk about weak institutions, just to expand on the bullet points, you have local bodies which are really stunted. Grassroots institutions of governance are not strong enough. The civil society is still weak. Educational institutions remain substandard. And other democratic institutions are still not strong. Poor governance, it's the second most corrupt state in Jammu, in India. The public delivery systems have been inadequate, and there's a gradual lack of faith in the system. Again, in terms of education and social backwardness, low literacy levels, much less than national Indian average, high educated unemployment, and low on the Human Development Index. In terms of growing extremism, Jammu and Kashmir was known for its Sufi Islam. In fact, it's the only school of Sufi Islam which is organic, indigenous. All other schools of Sufi Islam which came to India came from either Turkey, Central Asia, or most particularly Afghanistan. Fortunately, we keep forgetting that Afghanistan was the center of most important Sufi faiths, including Khaja Muhyiddin Chishti, the Chishti order, and several other orders. But even while the Sufi Islam might have been eroded, there is also growing hardline sentiment within the Hindus of Jammu and the Buddhists of Ladakh. And what you have is also that militancy and terrorism are still alive. There's a report which said that the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which was behind the Mumbai terrorist blasts, have managed to infiltrate into the valley over the last few days. On top of it, if this was not enough, you have a parasite economy. The government cannot even raise revenues enough to pay for its employees. The tourist economy, which was the backbone of the economy, has been drastically hit by violence. You have poor infrastructure, and obviously little room for private investment given the circumstances under which J&K is today. Now, under these circumstances, is there really sign for hope? Given all these problems that exist in terms of the politics, in terms of the economy, in terms of the society. Fortunately, and Dr. Sanjay Baru is sitting here, who used to be media advisor to the Prime Minister. Fortunately, over the last 5 years, there has been, and frankly speaking, over the last 6-7 years, and more particularly so over the last 5 years, there's growing awareness within the Government of India of the need to address many of the problems that affect Jammu and Kashmir in their entirety through a more visionary approach than we have seen over the last 62 years. First of all, you've had the most credible, inclusive, democratic elections in Jammu and Kashmir, arguably in the history of Jammu and Kashmir. You have had over 67% of people voting. Outside one district or one administrative unit in the Kashmir Valley, more than 50% voted. They were inclusive, they were fair, they were transparent, and even all the independent international observers who were there believe that this is certainly one of the most credible elections, and certainly as credible as elections anywhere else in India. What you also have, despite the fact of terrorism and continuing violence, an overwhelming sentiment against violence within Kashmir. And increasingly a growing sentiment for the return of the Kashmiri Hindus and for Kashmiriyat, which is really, and I can explain these terms in the discussion, which is really a little telegraphic word for Sufi Islam, where all the kind of syncretic tendencies that exist in Kashmir have existed in Kashmir. Kashmiriyat is the name given to that little indigenous culture which absorbed all these tendencies, syncretic tendencies. You have a new generation of young men and women seeking opportunities in India's knowledge economy. You have growing attractiveness of India's soft power, as evidenced by the new engagement of young Kashmiris with the Indian economy, whether it's in the valley and J&K, but also outside J&K. And even amongst those sections which are seen as being separatist or pro-Pakistan, there's an almost complete disillusionment with Pakistan. A sense that a country whose own democratic record and whose own experience with governance is so poor can hardly deliver any better in Jammu and Kashmir. And as a consequence of this, there's also a great disenchantment with extremism and a willingness, overwhelming willingness within Jammu and Kashmir of the people to work towards creating peace with dignity. Now, given this, what has and can be done? Internally, by the Government of India, and bilaterally with Islamabad. I think the most symbolically, the best example of the new visionary approach adopted is that now, as I said, the Government of India seems to want to address, or wanted to address the problems through a new, more comprehensive approach, a more strategic rather than a tactical approach. And over the last 2 days, Kenneth, as you know, we've been discussing issues of security, but also how the whole idea of security has been transformed. And Japan first, but increasingly all over Asia, there is the idea of comprehensive security, human security. And indeed, the Prime Minister himself, and you'll see that slide in a minute, outlined this vision of comprehensive security for Jammu and Kashmir, where he actually said, and I'll show you that slide in a minute, that security is freedom from fear, and that comprehensive security really means freedom from fear in every sense, and that what you want to achieve in Jammu and Kashmir is physical security, political security, economic security, and cultural security. He, speaking in, I think, in Srinagar, he said, and I'm sure Dr. Baru, you probably are responsible for some of these words, but he said, I am guided by a simple vision. Jammu and Kashmir has tremendous economic potential. The talent of its people is unparalleled, and its cultural diversity is unique. It can and must become a model of real empowerment of the people and comprehensive security for them. If this happens, J&K will be the epitome of unity, peace, and prosperity in diversity. Real empowerment, my friends, is not about slogans. Only when every woman and child from Ladakh to Lakhanpur, these are the kind of limits of the geographical limits, the categorical limits of Indian Jammu and Kashmir, from Ladakh to Lakhanpur and from Kargil to Kathua, through Kashmir feel secure in every sense of the word, can we truly say that people have been empowered. Security is freedom from fear, and this is what we want to achieve. We want the people of Jammu and Kashmir to be free from all fears about their future. We want the people to be physically secure. We want the people to be economically secure. And we want every group to be politically secure. And we want every community to be culturally and socially secure. This has never happened, in my understanding, over the last 50 years that we've been plagued with the problem of Jammu and Kashmir, where the Prime Minister actually outlines a vision which is almost on the cutting edge of international relations, understanding of how you need to view problems in conflict areas. And I'm expanding all these elements which form comprehensive security. For physical security to be achieved, you of course need an end to violence and terrorism comprehensively. You need an end also to human rights abuses that have existed. You need that the army, which has been present in Jammu and Kashmir, return to its pre-1989 position, and that law and order becomes primarily a police responsibility, and that you need also a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which will actually address many of the grievances that exist of people, especially with respect to displacement, abuses, and civil conflict. For political security to be achieved, you need a devolution and decentralization of power. You need to ensure that power flows to the grassroots in the real sense of the term, and you need a measure of autonomy and self-rule, and we can expand this during the discussion. For cultural security, we need that the diversity of people, and I only mentioned Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh and the Buddhists, Kashmiris and Muslims as a way of illustrating the huge diversity. If I were to go and talk about the diversity of Jammu and Kashmir, the lecture itself could just focus on that. But the diversity, and that's why people often say that Jammu and Kashmir is in some ways a microcosm for India, that it is a micro India, and in some ways the test of Indian pluralism, secularism, democracy, or not the test, but the success of Indian democracy, pluralism, and multiculturalism will be best reflected in the way that India manages Jammu and Kashmir. And of course, notions of economic security, where you need to create a knowledge society, and it's already happening, many of these things, but as I said, you ask yourself this question, can it become a reality? And many of the bullet points that I focus on suggest that not much has been done. Much has already been done in each one of these categories, but I'll still suggest that there is much more that can be and needs to be done, not just at the state level, at the government level, but also at the level of civil society. I'd once suggested that you need a 5R approach in terms of addressing many of the conflicts. You need a reconciliation between all the stakeholders, because the conflicts are not just, as I said, either state-driven or even neither state-to-state nor even state-driven. So you need a reconciliation between all the different groups that inhabit Jammu and Kashmir. You need a revival of the composite culture of pluralism. You need a rehabilitation of all the people who have been displaced from Jammu and Kashmir. And of course, you need a reconstruction of the economy and restoration of faith in the systems of governance. Incidentally, this may not be the best time to suggest it, but the most intrusive, progressive, and well-defined right to information exists in India, and that's been expanded to Jammu and Kashmir, where every individual or organization can actually demand information from the government or any kind of autonomous organization, and that government or that authority in the public, in the autonomous institution, has to comply within a certain amount of time. And you can even ask, why have I not? I know this may not be the time to say this, but I was about to say this is not the place to say it, but I can even demand, why was I not being made professor? And the Vice-Chancellor, the President of the university, will be obliged to actually show me the meetings of the selection committee. In some ways, people could argue that this is compromising on the sanctity. But given the huge liberating effect and the great empowerment that this has led to, I think it's worth it. And Jammu and Kashmir, it's happened. So you can actually demand information of a variety of kinds which will be truly empowering. And it's been extended about 2 weeks ago to Jammu and Kashmir. But this is only one example of the manner in which there's at least an attempt at restoring faith in the systems of governance. You obviously need multiple reconciliations within the Kashmir Valley between Pandits and Muslims, within the state between the Buddhists, Muslims, and the Dogras of Jammu, the Hindu Dogras of Jammu, but also between the regions and the sub-regions. You need a reconciliation between New Delhi and Srinagar and Jammu and Ladakh, and you need a reconciliation between across the line of control which divides the two Jammu and Kashmirs, one with Pakistan and one with India, and of course you need a final reconciliation between India and Pakistan. And as I said, the valley reconciliation between the Pandits and the Muslims, within the state, on devolution and regional balance, and between the center and between the state and the center. You already have some of the most progressive ways to handle this. I think the Prime Minister constituted working groups on all the areas that I have identified, and you have had almost path-breaking recommendations on economic development, on governance, on confidence-building measures, including the issue of human rights, on center-state relations and devolution. All the groups except one has submitted its reports. Many of these recommendations have not been implemented. But if those recommendations of those working groups were implemented, That again would be a historic path-breaking step, and I hope that when the next government takes shape, that this will be one of the things on their agenda. Now, obviously, the most difficult part of this reconciliation, as I said, is the one between India and Pakistan, between the two sides of Jammu and Kashmir, which lie under the control of India and Pakistan. But even here, what you have seen is, over the last 5 years, is really unprecedented amount of civil society interaction and a movement of goods, ideas, people and services of a kind which you have not seen before. Limited, but unprecedented. Travel between the two lines, between the two Kashmirs was almost impossible before various entry points were opened. Again, it's not easy to travel, but it's possible now, which it was not at all possible even a few years ago. And finally, of course, the idea, again, of Manmohan Singh of trying to convert the line of control into actually a line of peace. But as I said, and this in some ways is probably the one part of my presentation which will interest students of international relations, and this is to do with the possibility of India-Pakistan reconciliation on Jammu and Kashmir. And let me say this, and many of you who have followed developments in the subcontinent may have read an article which Steve Cole has written in the New Yorker recently, where he talks about a back channel that existed between the Indian Prime Minister and the Pakistani President, and how advanced that back channel had become, or had advanced to a point where a resolution of Jammu and Kashmir was indeed in sight. Whether Cole is right in making that claim, I don't know, but it's clear that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and President Musharraf had arrived at an understanding. And this is the most critical, and it's critical to understand this, because there are often people who believe that India and Pakistan can never resolve Jammu and Kashmir on their own. And this understanding was predicated on the following 5 or 6 elements. One, that there would have to be an end of violence and terrorism, and that you could not obviously proceed any further unless Pakistan put a permanent end to the so-called infrastructure, a terrorist infrastructure that exists. But once that happened, you could have the line of control becoming a true line of peace, where there would be a freedom, or where there could be a free movement of ideas, goods, services, and there would be an irrelevance of that so-called border that exists between the two Kashmirs. And that both sides of Jammu and Kashmir, there would be a devolution of power, there would be a significant decentralization on the Indian side of J&K and on the Pakistan side of J&K, and that in order to ensure that there's greater cooperation and maximum utilization of natural resources, optimal utilization of natural resources, you could have consultative mechanisms in areas like water, tourism, transport, and even the possibility of a supranational body to supervise and oversee this cooperation was thought of. In other words, the leaders far ahead of the bureaucracies or even academics, and certainly of the establishments, had thought of a virtual reunification of Jammu and Kashmir without any explicit erosion of political sovereignty. The issue is, can Pakistan be trusted? Is Pakistan willing to confront the Frankenstein it has created? The fact that that understanding did not translate into reality, one of the reasons was, of course, that both leaders, and that I think Cole has got it right, that both India and Pakistan needed time to actually convince their domestic constituencies to build a certain support base, and while the two leaders were doing that, Musharraf or Musharraf's position became so untenable and weak that his own foreign minister advised him not to have a summit meeting, according to Kohl, because the danger of a summit meeting which resulted in agreement on Kashmir but led to a revolt in Pakistan or a public outrage in Pakistan meant that all the work that had been done by the back channel or the chemistry that had been developed between the two leaders would be lost. So Kasuri and Musharraf both decided that the time was not ripe, opportune to actually arrive at a settlement. And of course, within India itself, the consensus had not been created. The Prime Minister was still in the process of convincing his own party, leave alone, the BJP would have to be consulted given its own kind of strident opposition on such issues, which of course it does so only in opposition. In reality, when it's in power, it itself had set up a back channel with Pakistan on Kashmir. I went to Pakistan a few weeks ago, and I still see great signs of hope. I'm an eternal optimist, but contrary to what you might read in the International Herald Tribune today, or not contrary, in some ways it just complements what it says, there is, after all, a return of democracy. And I think it's not going to be easy, no matter what everyone says, and we know that the Pakistani army is the strongest actor in Pakistan, but it's not going to be easy to go back to what existed before the elections that led to the election of the PPP. You have a civil society that's really vibrant and strong even now. The press, despite the occasional bans on their cable channels, it's probably got the strongest English media, print and independent print media. And I say this, even in comparison to India, the English language press is freer. I don't know whether Dr. Baru will agree, but they are willing to question almost every mantra of their government's policy. While I think in India, there's a kind of tendency towards self-censorship. There's a recognition of Pakistan's huge internal problems and also a realization that you need to make peace with India. There's not a single party in Pakistan today which says that enmity with India is either needed or is an option. To the point that I met this ambassador, Rustum Shah, who is a Pashto and a great defender of the Taliban. And he predicates every statement that he says in the favor of the Taliban by saying that friendship with India is a necessity, but the Taliban are good people. What I'm just trying to demonstrate to you that how wide the spectrum is in Pakistan in favor of good relations with India. Army and the ISI are the strongest. Today's Herald Tribune, I don't know how many of you read it, talked about this S-wing of the intelligence agency, the Inter-Services Intelligence, which is responsible for much of the destruction that's happening in Afghanistan, which still has strategic assets within the Taliban and within possibly the Al-Qaeda, and they want to retain these assets for the day when the Americans move out of Afghanistan so that they can then jockey back their earlier position or exercise the kind of influence that they did. But there is also tremendous international pressure. Of course, the sentiment against America is, I've never seen any other country where the sentiment against America is stronger than in Pakistan. But so is American pressure. And there's also a recognition, apart from the fact that friendship with India is a necessity, that they seem to have lost. They may not have lost the battle on Kashmir, but they have lost the war for nationhood. That Pakistan's whole enterprise, if it's not a failed enterprise, it's a project which is in severe trouble. And in contrast, India's growing soft power is seen with envy and also a certain degree of recognition that you could somehow piggyback on this Indian emergence. Of course, The signs of despair, you all know. Is it fractured? Is it failing? It's every day's headlines. You also know that there are part of Pakistan's establishment will still see terrorism as part of their state policy. What's happening in Kashmir, what happened in Mumbai, what happened in Kabul, where there was a suicide attack, clearly supported by the ISI, which remains extremely influential. We know how the Zardaris and the Nawaz Sharifs of Pakistan are almost creating the conditions where the army will have no choice but to intervene. And unfortunately, while there was a almost trickling down of infiltration and terrorists into Kashmir, this has increased over the last few weeks, as are the signals to Kashmiri separatists about what they should do or not do vis-a-vis India. So, in other words, I'm one of those who believes that if Pakistan were to stabilize even marginally, it should be possible that India can both internally and externally arrive at a settlement of Jammu and Kashmir based not on the idea of territoriality, but based on the idea that what is most important is the welfare of the people of Jammu and Kashmir across the line of control. If you were to address the conflict in Jammu and Kashmir, and that's what I haven't done, as a conflict over territory, in irredentist terms, in terms of history, in terms of ideologies, it's impossible to get a resolution. But if you were to actually see this as a problem which needs to be solved for the sake of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and in some ways for the people of the subcontinent, it's easily to arrive at a win-win solution. In terms of territory, it's a zero-sum game. In terms of the welfare of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, it's possible to arrive at a win-win solution, and the main markers of that win-win solution are already in place. It was, I think, one of the emperors, Mughal emperors, who once he went to the valley, said in Persian or Dari, that if there's a paradise on earth, it's here, it's here, it's here. I think it said, Agar firdaus barwe zami ast, hami asto, hami asto, hami asto. But now people say that if Jahangir were to come back, he would say, Agar Jahannam, which is the word for hell, exists anywhere, or if we did 10 years ago. Now, will we have a more perfect union in J&K, Jannat or Jahannam by 2020? I think what you have are the possibilities of actually recreating that paradise if we ensure the following. That you continue the dialogue. In fact, I would say that you have to even continue the dialogue with Pakistan no matter what Pakistan continues to do. Because Pakistan today, as we know, has multiple centers of power. You need to keep strengthening those centers of power which at least believe in friendship with India. You may not want to talk, or you may want to continue to put pressure on those elements which keep on subverting your dialogue or which still see terrorism as an instrument. But you need to continue that dialogue. You need to continue the dialogue internally. You need to revive the strong traditional culture of pluralism and tolerance. You need to build strong institutions and devolve power. And you need to work with all your allies to transform Pakistan into what Pakistan used to be, or was originally envisaged to be by Mr. Jinnah, which was a moderate Muslim state, but a modern state. So I think India needs to work with all the allies of Pakistan, and including those that exist in Southeast Asia, to transforming Pakistan into that modern and moderate Muslim state. And if that happens, and if all that I have outlined happens, and much will of course depend on who the government in power will be, and whether the media advisor will be Dr. Baru or not. But if that happens, if that by serendipity or design, then I think there can be a vision by 2020 that you have a Naya, which is a new J&K, violence-free, tolerant, plural, skilled and prosperous, and in some ways will become a model for all multicultural societies. And maybe you can then come back to India and to J&K and take lessons for Singapore from Jammu and Kashmir, God willing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have time for questions, comments. I'm sure there are many reactions to Professor Mattoo's very broad-ranging lecture. So could we have the first question? Oh, can I also say, please, can you use your mics and just give a brief introduction of who you are and where you're from? Can we have the first question?
My name is Gopi Ratnaraj. I'm a faculty member at the Likwani School. Professor Mattoo, I was a bit puzzled that you failed to touch upon two issues which lies at the core of the conflict. One is the founding ideology of Pakistan and India. Do you mean to say that Pakistan is going to give up on its ideology in pursuit of peace in Jammu and Kashmir? And the second question is, you also didn't provide sufficient indication about what would be the Army's role in the reconciliation initiative with India on Jammu and Kashmir issue.
You know, that ideology is history. It's dead. The belief that Hindus and Muslims cannot live together and that you need a separate nation called Pakistan has been defeated. It was defeated several years ago. But today you have, I mean, I don't need to say this to you, you know this better than I do, that you have more Muslims living in India than you do in Pakistan. And more importantly, the fact of Pakistan's virtual disintegration is, I thought, a good example of how the only cementing bond cannot be religion. After all, if the Pashtos are fighting the Sindhis in Sindh, if the various Yusufzai tribes are fighting some other Durrani tribes in Peshawar, if the Punjabis are suspicious of everyone around them, where is Islam as the cementing bond? Of course, some people would say that the breakaway of Bangladesh was one good example of how you need more than just religion to bind a society and a state together. And Pakistan has to, through this process of churning, discover what that cement will be. I think quite clearly it has to be something different from just Islam. In the Indian case, it was obviously democracy, secularism, multiculturalism, kind of initial emphasis on a pro-poor economic policies. Those are the kind of values that bound India or helped construct a strong nation state in India. Unfortunately, within Pakistan, that single bond of Islam didn't work. But clearly, Jinnah himself, even while he believed that you needed to have a nation state for Muslims, didn't want it to be an Islamic state. One of the first speeches that he gave after Pakistan was created said, go back to your temples, go back to your churches, go back to your mosques, but let that remain a private, I'm just paraphrasing Jinnah, let that remain a private activity. Religion should have no purpose in public life. Or more critically, Pakistan was created in all the provinces where in some ways Jinnah's Muslim League had little influence. In Frontier province, you had Khan Ghaffar Khan, who was an ally of Gandhi. In Baluchistan, the Baluchi Sardars recognized no one, leave alone the Muslim League. In Sindh, you had a Sindhi nationalism, which was at the fore. In Punjab, you had a Unionist party. So Pakistan was created really by the Muhajirs, the refugees of UP and Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Army, of course, you need to create an incentive structure or a sanction structure for the army. And that only you can only do it in not working with the Americans. The army has to be convinced that they can retain their influence and their primacy even if there is peace with India. I think they have enough problems now on their eastern border for them to recognize that their only raison d'etre need not be hostility towards India.
The lady at the back first, followed by you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Hina Khalid. I'm an MPP junior head at Al School, and I'm from Pakistan. So, two very quick questions. In your presentation, you frequently mentioned that because of the current situation in Pakistan, because Pakistan has a lot of problems and all, so the people in Kashmir have, to a certain extent, their disillusion with Pakistan. So I'm just curious as to the, while in theory, yes, it would make sense, but I just want to get an understanding of on what basis have you made this statement? Is it predicated on something which was said by the people in Kashmir themselves, or by the, like, you know, when we extrapolate that if a particular situation is there, this is the consequence? And secondly, in your presentation, you mentioned that we would like to give the people of Kashmir economic freedom, political freedom, and everything. And I'm just curious as to how you would implement, India plans on, if, for example, India is to implement this, so how will this be done without eroding or compromising the like desire for political independence of the people in Kashmir itself? Thank you.
One, how did I say, or why did I say that people seem to be disillusioned with Pakistan? The conclusion is drawn from both anecdotal evidence and empirical sources. Anecdotally, I go to Kashmir, I live there part of the time, so that's the anecdotal, but that has no relevance for a good, serious discussion. The empirical evidence was the recent elections. All the pro-Pakistani separatist groups called for a boycott. The boycott didn't happen. So this is just one, but there are several other examples I can give you which seems to demonstrate that there's a great amount of disillusionment. And of course, intuitively, which cannot be discounted, intuitively, any state which, or any people who have a sense of empathy with a certain political system, social system, religious system, will obviously get disillusioned if that political, social, religious system doesn't seem to be working as well as they are taught. So the existing problems would clearly have an impact on what's happening in the Valley of Kashmir. But that's intuitive. The empirical evidence is the elections, and the anecdotal is really, you can discount. The second question was what? Yeah, you know, the principal question is, what do you mean by freedom? And that's why I said, freedom from if you define it in terms of this idea of comprehensive security, where you are economically, culturally, politically, socially free and empowered, and that you essentially are almost unified, virtually reunified, both sides of Jammu and Kashmir, it will really be tantamount to azadi, without actually addressing hard issues of political sovereignty, which will make it impossible for you to achieve at any kind of negotiated settlement. In other words, it's really the beauty and the magic of the near settlement that happened between Musharraf and Manmohan Singh was that you could create the conditions where the aspirations of the people of Jammu and Kashmir could be fulfilled without hurting the sentiments of either the people in India or the people in Pakistan, or really without compromising on the national security of either India or Pakistan. And that's why, that's why it's important in some ways to have these kind of out-of-the-box, more imaginative and nuanced ways of looking at what seem to be intractable problems.
My name is Radhika. I'm a LKY student here. I was just wondering the point that you made about not viewing the conflict as a territorial conflict. How popular is this? You know, in some senses, you're redefining the problem, and I was wondering how popular this opinion, this view is with the key stakeholders in the conflict. Because if the key stakeholders continue to view it as a territorial conflict, then most of this is not going to work. Could you throw some light on that?
Someone once, when this dialogue between the Indian Prime Minister and the Pakistani President was happening, someone said to me, the people want peace. The leaders have made peace, but the establishments cannot still adjust to this new reality. Which means the foreign ministries, the bureaucracies, the intelligence agencies still work on old principles. And they are a big stakeholder, the most powerful stakeholder, believe me, both in India and Pakistan. But if you have the political will, determination, and the support, you can overcome that resistance from the establishment. But given that that settlement didn't happen, obviously the establishments are back to where they were. I think the people of Jammu and Kashmir would be very happy with this. Again, intuitive, based on no empirical evidence, but I think they would be happy with the settlement, which gave them the space, which helped them develop this idea of comprehensive security in reality.
My name is Amar Malik. I'm an MPP student here at the Lee Kuan Yew School. When I heard that this talk was taking place and I entered this auditorium, I thought that this would be a scholarly academic discussion on a very critical topic. But with all due respect, what it has turned out to be in the first part was a very effective and excellent marketing of the Indian policy in Kashmir, and the other part was a thorough Pakistan bashing session, and it turned out to be going right towards the basis of the existence of a sovereign state. But apart from that, I'm not here to remind ourselves whatever has happened with Muslims in India, let's say in Gujarat in 2002, or the activities of the Indian intelligence agency RAW in building links with Pakistani insurgents from Afghanistan. What I'm here to say is that according to the June the 3rd plan of 1947, when the British established a system whereas Muslim majority areas were to go to Pakistan and Hindu majority areas or non-Muslim majority areas were to go to India. In the state of Hyderabad, as I understand it from my perspective, it was a Muslim ruler and the Hindu population. It turned out to be part of India. On the other hand, Kashmir seems to be the entirely opposite case, where Indian troops landed on the Srinagar airport, took hold of it. There was a war. There were people coming from Pakistan. Why can't we move on from whatever you said about Manmohan and Musharraf talk? Another aspect of that discussion was demilitarization of Kashmir, and there was talk of Indian forces withdrawing and sort of all that stuff. That seems really plausible. Where in this entire scenario is the question of the aspirations of the people of Kashmir? You said that there were elections, but when there are 500 or more, 500,000 troops sitting in a small region, how could you expect elections to be free, fair, and transparent? Just a general, just looking at from the whole issue from a different perspective.
No, I'm sorry you didn't find the talk up to your standards, but my intention was not really to bash Pakistan or defend the government of India. Or you may be absolutely right in Junagadh or Pakistan may have a stronger legal case on Kashmir, but that's not my intention to go back into history. You fought 3.5 wars, 4 wars. You've not been able to get Jammu and Kashmir, Pakistan, or solve Kashmir in any shape or form. And the point about demilitarization is well taken, because along with that understanding was also, once violence and terrorism ended, the troops would move back into the barracks. So I agree with you. You know, that's what I'm trying to say, that if you think of this conflict in zero-sum terms, that someone's going to win and someone's going to lose, and that it's impossible for India and Pakistan for both to claim victory on Jammu and Kashmir. Then the only approach is to go back to the kind of approach that you have or others have or the ministries on both sides have. For all, RAW may be doing whatever, but that's besides the point. The point is, how do you address a problem like Jammu and Kashmir as a scholar, not in the most scholarly, imaginative fashion. This is scholarship, that you try and think not about UN resolutions which are never going to be translated into reality, or you don't think about what happened in Junagadh, Hyderabad, and make the most important, perfect legal case. But you examine the realities of the problems that exist in South Asia today, and you say, how can I find a solution which will satisfy India, Pakistan, and the Kashmiris? You know, if you're going to have, India will never, ever accept a plebiscite in Kashmir. Not in 1,000 years. Pakistan always feel aggrieved about Kashmir. They feel there's injustice done to them by India on Kashmir. The Kashmiris are caught in this huge conflict. They have their own aspirations. So the imaginative way is to look for a second best solution which will somehow satisfy all three constituencies. And the only way, I think, is a great measure of self-rule or autonomy, decentralization of power, cross-border institutions, mechanisms, call it what you will, demilitarization or pulling back the army once violence and terrorism are eliminated, and greater cooperation. Tell me what you find wrong. I want you to answer this question because I feel that you have reacted more from the gut than I have, thinking that this is an Indian scholar, he has come with a preconceived notion. So I am asking you, forget the rest of the talk, what do you find difficult in the solution?
I find it extremely workable, but at the same time there are elements of idealism in this. I think it's a question of looking at it like a tree. The branches and the leaves and the thorns, if you will continue to grow up till you cut the root of it. And I think the root has to be addressed. And the one way of doing it, obviously, is to demilitarize and look at the problem. Because
I agree. But can you demilitarize without ending violence?
Of course not, yeah.
And I'm one of those who actually believes that in order to settle Pakistan, in order for Pakistan to feel at peace with itself, you have to settle Kashmir. I am one of those who believes that. It's no one else, there are very few people in India who would believe that. But I actually believe, but the only way you can settle it is predicated on this understanding, which after all, let's not belittle this understanding. It was arrived at by the Prime Minister of India and the President of Pakistan. The President of Pakistan may no longer be the President of Pakistan, and the Prime Minister of India may be facing general election, but these were the top leaders of the country.
Just one small point, I don't want to take too much time. From the Pakistani side, President Musharraf clearly at the end of 2006 at least had gone back from his Pakistan's 60-year-old stand on the UN resolutions. He said that conditionally, yes, we can. What discount, if at all, did the Indian side give? I don't understand that. Thank you.
I mean, I recognize that there was a degree of asymmetry, that Pakistan probably went back from its absolutist stance much more than India appeared to do. But let me tell you, the very fact of actually addressing Kashmir was extremely difficult for any Indian leader. The very fact of accepting a Pakistani role in Kashmir would be impossible for an Indian leader. All these things are as explosive for an Indian political leader as they may have been for a Pakistani president. Obviously, Musharraf could be much more explicit. He was an army general. He didn't have a public constituency. And the Indian Prime Minister would be much more subtle and nuanced in doing this. But I would think that this is a compromise from both sides, although it may not look like one at first glance. But not in what I'm saying is that why hold on to absolutist legal positions when they have no chance on earth of being translated into reality? I would actually like Dr. Baru to intervene also in this discussion, because he's within the...
No, I don't want to intervene. I just want to state a fact. You mentioned Steve Cole's essay in the New Yorker, which is on the website, and I hope some of you have read it, but otherwise you should read it. There's an American journalist who has spoken to people, obviously on both sides. All I can say is that whatever Steve Cole has written is correct. So, I mean, so you please, you should read Steve Cole in your New Yorker. So whatever he has written there is correct. And the fact that, he published it 2 months back, and till today, no one from either India or Pakistan has denied what he has published, suggests that both governments accept that what has been published is fact. So just take what is there in the public domain. You had one slide here which summarized President Musharraf's statement. President Musharraf actually said that to an Indian journalist in an interview to A.G. Nurani of Frontline magazine. He made those statements. What? Borders are irrelevant, army demilitarization of Kashmir. Those 5 points were the statement of President Musharraf in an interview to an Indian journalist published in 2006, and we are in 2009. And the fact that an Indian Prime Minister did not reject it, now you see, that is where the subtlety comes. You don't have to accept it. The fact that it has not been rejected, and the fact that for 4 years no one has attacked that position in India. After all, it's appeared in the media, it's there in print, in black and white, and nobody has burned that magazine or denounced it. Nobody in India has rejected it. Now that itself is a major, major step forward, because I think from an Indian perspective, what people should realize is here is a country that has won 4 wars and yet is willing to negotiate. I mean, it has never been the case in history. Never in recorded history has a victor in a war negotiated with the loser. But here is the first time a victor in 4 wars is willing to negotiate. I think that itself is a huge compromise politically. And normally we would have thought that whoever is that prime minister who takes that kind of a position would have been voted out. But so far he has not been.
No.
Do you want to respond to that?
No, I'm not going to make any scholarly comment. I'm just going to state a blunt fact. Thing is, this is for the benefit of people who are who come from a region outside of South Asia. All that you need to do is just look at the statistics of non-Muslim population in Pakistan before 1947 and the percentage of non-Muslim population in India before 1947, and compare that with the statistics of non-Muslim population in Pakistan today, and then the non-Muslim population in India today. And you draw the necessary conclusion which society turned out to be more tolerant.
How many students from India and Pakistan do you have at the master's program? If the laws of Singapore don't prohibit it, you should all work together to try and see if you can have a project on Jammu and Kashmir, or water. Water resources is the other big issue. Why didn't you people do it collectively? I think it's a good idea. I would have thought that your generation would not be have so much baggage. But this is the way South Asia is turning out. The the generation that's coming seems to be much more affected by the wrongdoings of the past. I think we should forget Junagadh, forget Hyderabad, and we are all, anyone who's liberal, and if there are problems in Gujarat or problems in India, who's denying them? It's open, it's known, and it's completely condemnable wherever it happens. But it shouldn't be a way of pointing fingers. I think we have to address these problems together. If Pakistan is in deep trouble now, I don't think it calls for any rejoicing in India. I certainly believe a tolerant, stable Pakistan, a strong Pakistan, and a Pakistan with nuclear weapons is certainly strong and should have no existentialist dilemmas that way, is in India's interest. And that's why it was good if you had a president who was at least seemed in Singaporean terms like a benevolent dictator, but it doesn't work out that way. President Musharraf didn't work out that way, but at least at one stage he seemed like a benevolent dictator.
Thanks, Amitabh. I think that was a very interesting presentation. I'm Rajshri Jaitley from the Institute of South Asian Studies. I agree with you. I think there are many signs of hope in Kashmir. There's just one aspect that I thought you could probably throw some more light on, and that is this so-called Talibanization of Pakistan. I think it's a huge problem. Pakistan, with all its problems, I think this is the one thing that could actually get it. The nature of terrorism has sort of changed, and then in the last few years you see that the face of terror is actually now even pointing inwards. So it's a huge problem, and any big problem in Pakistan is likely to have very grave implications even for us. With Kashmir being very vulnerable and susceptible to this, I mean, for a very long time, how big do you see this, or how big an impact could this have in the future? In terms of the revival of militancy again in Kashmir. So even if we sort of went ahead a few steps, could this be something that could pull it back?
You know, what you can have in Kashmir, or what you can have anywhere in South Asia, this could be acts of terrorism. But what you can't have now, or at least this is my not just gut feeling, but at least my argument, reasoned argument, I hope, that you can't have an insurgency. In other words, you cannot have a situation in which there will be the Taliban will be welcomed, or any kind of extremist ideology will find roots in Kashmir. But acts of terrorism, you need two individuals to perpetuate an act of terrorism. I think. And frankly speaking, when I went to Pakistan, I feel that there's a great realization within Pakistan, within even those elements in Pakistan which I said were traditionally hostile towards India, and with good reason, I imagine, of the deep internal problems that exist. After all, Swat is how many kilometers from Islamabad or Lahore? 300. And from Lahore? Twice that. Okay. The feeling that you had, but Swat was seen as a conservative, but a very tolerant society. Not everyone is happy with the compromise that the government has made with Maulana Fazlullah. There are others who think that was the only choice, that you have to make a distinction between those who are devout Muslims demanding a return of the Sharia, or demanding that Sharia be enforced, and those who are perpetrators of violence. But there are others who say, even if you have to do that, you should do it from a position of strength. That even if you have to do it in Afghanistan, make a distinction between the good Taliban and the bad Taliban, do it from a position of strength. But in Swat, you did it from a position of complete weakness. But look at the complexity of the situation. The prime movers of a compromise on Pakistan were not, of compromise in Swat, were not the mainstream parties or even the religious parties. It was Badshah Khan's party which demanded that this be imposed. So you have very delicate, fragile situation, not just in Swat. Of course, we know the situation as it exists or obtains in the frontier province or Baluchistan. Much will depend on the manner in which Pakistan addresses these problems over the next few months. And I don't know whether Obama has a real plan. As I said, I think one of the important reasons why Pakistani scholars seem to suggest for the Talibanization of parts of Pakistan is the presence of the Americans. It's a simplistic, reductionist. They say sab kuch theek ho jata hai, everything would be okay if the Americans were to leave. But that's not going to happen. So it's a fragile, very delicate situation. What should India do? That's the kind of question.
Yeah, my name is Sanjeev Shah. I used to be a student at LKY. This is a hypothetical question, but I'd like your considered answer on this question. What if Pakistan and India were not divided in 1947? What would India look like today?
I always like to take an optimistic view of this. We could look at what India would have been. I mean, we would have access to Central Asia. We would have, as someone said, the world's best cricket team. We would have a huge natural resources. But the danger is that the Punjabis would have taken over the subcontinent. No, I don't know. This is a thought experiment which I haven't conducted. But I would like to believe that communal relations would be less fragile than they are, not just in Pakistan, but in India as well. And in an opinion survey carried out in Pakistan by Newsline magazine several years ago, said that Pakistani Muslims thought that the Muslims of the subcontinent would have been better off. And that included Muslims in Pakistan, if Pakistan had not been partitioned. If you look at the work of Aisha Jalal, so that we can do our Pakistani friend feels that there is some kind of mea culpa here as well, they feel that Jinnah really didn't want a separate state in Pakistan, and that the Congress leadership forced him. He had actually done it only as a way of bargaining a better deal for Muslims in India, in a more federal India. But in Shimla, when Wavell came, Nehru did not accept that. So if you had a more federal, decentralized India with a combination of what Gandhi's vision was and some of Nehru's progressive policies, and Jinnah also going back to being an ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity, which he was before he founded the Muslim League, you may have had a India or a South Asia which wouldn't have to go through so many troubles. What do you say? Was a partition a mistake? Okay. You're speaking from the gut.
we better move on, actually. So.
Student from India. Would like to know regarding Prime Minister's position on special status to Kashmir in his vision and its relevance.
I think it's across the board people recognize that Article 370, even the BJP, which had asked for its revocation when it was not in power, but as the NDA, they gave up that as part of their minimum common program. So I think everyone recognizes that one of the great strengths of Indian federalism in the Indian constitution is that you do not put all states and all center-state relations within a straitjacket. Within the Northeast, you have a series of flexible constitutional provisions which give a great deal of space and autonomy to much of the Northeast of India. So similarly, Article 370 becomes an issue of debate during elections. But in reality, I would sense that there's wide acceptance that you need to have this as a way of providing a certain amount of space to Jammu and Kashmir.
Second question.
So, like in your presentation, you've discussed an approach which is an out-of-the-box approach as a way to go forward and to gain peace in Kashmir and overall development of the region. But, sir, I feel that approaching that, actually going towards peace in Kashmir is something which cannot be achieved until and unless the relations between India and Pakistan stabilize and both countries stop eyeing one another with distrust. And in the event, for example, I'm not pointing any fingers here, but in the event of the Mumbai blast that happened, the first reaction was that they were from Pakistan and all, which was not a very good way to go about it, because that in a sense creates a lot of resentment and hostility, and any progress that has happened, it actually goes back to ground zero. So in that sense, I think that until and unless leaders from both countries become more mature, maybe, in a sense to deal with situations in a much better manner, we cannot proceed with the Kashmir issue.
You're speaking the words of the government of India. That's what many within the government of India often argue. But it's also built on two different approaches. That you either solve the less difficult problems first and then address the more complex, the more difficult issues later. This was the approach that India had with China. They don't address the boundary question first, normalize relations, build confidence, generate trust, and then address an issue which has caused tension or war. But I think Pakistan feels so strongly about the Kashmir issue that they feel that progress on Kashmir, that unless there is progress on Kashmir, they cannot normalize relations with India. At least this is the sense that I got, and this is, I think, given that there was such a strong feeling in Pakistan, I think India decided to actually address Kashmir along with the other issues like Sir Creek or Wooler or Siachen. I think the natural tendency is to move from the less difficult to the more difficult. But these are two different approaches.
Any more questions?
Hi, I enjoyed your talk very much. I'm Sanjana from India. I'm curious to know what your opinion is on the new Abdullah administration engaging in the Valley, how that's going to change the relationship with the state, with New Delhi as well as with Islamabad. Do you see any paradigm changes in the foreign policy approach and its internal approach?
I don't think in terms of foreign policy there would be a major role that Mr. Umar Abdullah would play. But I think he's a young, modern, widely traveled, technologically savvy person, so someone like all of you. So I think he's also not got the kind of baggage that most political leaders are either born with or collect during their years trying to become a political leader. However, the heat and dust of Indian politics can scar the most innocent soul. So we have to wait and watch. I think it's early days. And in any case, I think to be a real, genuine, masked political leader requires much more than just being intelligent, innocent, technologically savvy. So let us see.
Yes.
You've mentioned a couple of times that you're an optimist, and I come from the same thinking as well. Given whatever was being done between Musharraf and Manmohan, that obviously is gone. We have an election coming up in India. A new government is coming, and hopefully things should, if they do stabilize in Pakistan, and India sees one or two people who are in charge of Pakistan actually. What can we look at as a best case scenario or an optimistic view in the next maybe 5 or 10 years or your 2020 vision? Can the line of control be turned into a border effectively? Is it workable? And once that happens, can people like me travel to their ancestral villages in the Kashmir Valley?
If you're going to dream, I think you have to dream big. Then you have to think of South Asia as a completely borderless region marked by economic prosperity, pluralism, tolerance. Where the European Union will look like a little toy region compared to our region. That's the kind of vision, and ASEAN will look like the most turbulent region in the world. But that's the kind of vision and dreaming that you have to dream as young public policy practitioners in the making. So I think, and it's going to be just a virtual border. It's like, if you have to dream, it's like going from France to Germany, where there is a notional, I don't even know whether there's a notional passport control somewhere along the border. But if you are carrying a EU passport, you just kind of, or maybe with a tag on your car, you just completely go without even seeing that passport control. I would imagine that could happen. If we stopped killing each other, if we stopped having these slanging matches with each other, if we stopped, and young people, if you all started dreaming big and believing that you can actually do it. Given that Barack Obama has shown how you can actually he may falter and fail in the next few days, but as long as he doesn't fail and falter, I think we have to remember that it's possible to make these changes, these dramatic transformations, through mobilization of a kind that most people wouldn't imagine or visualize. And remember, I don't know how many of you have read that speech. I think I make it obligatory for every student of mine to read his speech on racism in America, A More Perfect Union. Has any of you read it? Or you should read that speech. It's the most powerful speech. You can go to YouTube and actually hear it if you have 40 minutes. Otherwise, take a printout or don't take a printout and read it for 20 minutes. But that's the most powerful speech and of relevance as much to Americans, blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians as it is to South Asians or Southeast Asians.
So India can concede its claim to the Pakistani side of Kashmir. That's foreseeable.
You know, it's already done. You don't need to do this explicitly. That, as I said, if you do it virtually, where you will, I mean, does anyone talk about Alsace-Lorraine? Does anyone talk about whether it should belong to France or Germany, and they fought 100 years over Alsace-Lorraine? If you actually are virtually unified, you can come and work in Srinagar or set up your own business in Srinagar and visit all your old villages and do some social work for them. How does it matter? And if you have a passport which allows you to travel without visa all over South Asia, does it really matter whether there's an Indian flag there or a Pakistani flag there? Doesn't matter. I think these are important in the terms of, frankly, even 20th century this stopped being important. 19th century nationalism was a very strong.
Professor Mattoo, I would agree with your comment about English journalism in Pakistan. My question is, has there been any independent appraisal about the presence of hundreds of thousands of troops in Kashmir? If you have such a large number of troops, atrocities are bound to occur. I want to know what's the attitude of the people of Kashmir.
People of Kashmir, people of Jammu, or people of anywhere where there are troops, obviously you don't like them if they're in a great overwhelming presence. And I would imagine that a majority of people would want troops to go away. The only issue is that can you do this without an end to violence? You might say this is a chicken and egg situation. Violence won't end until troops go away. But I still feel that you can only do it when you're reasonably confident that the infrastructure which creates the instruments of violence is effectively demolished. It's not easy to take these decisions in a democracy. But normatively, I agree with you.
Okay, I think we've probably come to the end of a very hopeful and also very robust discussion. Would you please join me in thanking Professor Amitabh Mattoo?